Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to this AHDB Potatoes webinar. It's really fantastic to have so many of you join us. My name is Laura Bouvet. I'm a Knowledge and Innovation Facilitator at AHDB, and I'm responsible for knowledge exchange in potato storage. So for those of you that have been joining AHDB Potatoes webinars over the past few months, it's lovely to see you back. And for those of you joining us for the first time online, a really warm welcome to you, and we hope that you find today's event informative. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just a bit of housekeeping before we move on to the topic of today. So for the purposes of this webinar, you're all on mute and your cameras are off. But you will be able to send your questions through via the question box that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. There should be a panel there. If you do have any technical issues, if you can't hear us or can't see the slides properly, the questions box is also the place to send your queries in, and one of my colleagues will be able to help you out. So the webinar is due to finish at 5 p.m. We might finish a bit earlier depending on how we get on with questions, but it's flexible. But we'll make sure to finish by 5 p.m. Bases and Naroso points are available, so do please submit your details, and we'll be able to process the numbers through. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on AHDB's YouTube channel, and you should also be receiving a link within 48 hours of the event. Next slide, please. So moving on to the topic of today, we're in a really crucial period in the potato calendar at the moment. Depending on where you're joining us from and what the rain has been like, some of you will have finished loading your stores, and others might be still lifting and loading. So the storage season starts now, really. So we wanted to take this opportunity to go over key principles and factors to take into consideration when loading, and more importantly, once the store has been loaded. So we'll first be hearing from Mark Means, an Norfolk potato grower, who will be giving us some insight into how he approaches store management after loading. So we went out filming with him last week, and as he was just finishing loading his store, so we'll play that video. And then after that, we'll be hearing from Adrian Cunnington, who's head of Sutton Bridge Crop Storage Research, and he'll be taking us through the technicalities in a bit more detail with drying, condensation, pull down. He'll be covering all of those. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A with Mark and Adrian. And you'll be able to fit in your questions, and we'll be able to have a discussion going. And then finally, to finish off the day, Andy Stephen from AgroVista will be giving us an update on harvest across the country, and that will be a video, and he'll be in conversation with my colleague David Wilson. But without further ado, if we could have the video up of Mark, and then we'll have the Q&A with Adrian after that. Thank you.
We are farmers at Tarrington Marsh at the bottom of the Wash, just in Norfolk. We are on grade 1 silt, but some is silty clay as well as silty clay loam, and we grow for the fresh market, and we supply all the major retailers. We're growing 300 acres of potatoes this year. We were a little bit less last year just due to rotation. We store on this site and also elsewhere just about 6,000 tonnes. and it's all cold store and it's all boxes. We have been using until really last year, it was cold storage temperature for sprout control, and then a bit of ethylene, and we've used spearmint oil as well. But we would then, since last season, when we had 1 dose of CIPC, this year we have used maleic hydrazide for the whole crop, bar where we're going and selling potatoes before Christmas. Going forward this year, we've followed the protocols. We've cleaned, vacuumed, brushed, cleaned out the grills, the refrigeration plant and the fans. We've actually improved the insulation as well, so we ripped up all the floors and cleaned out all the floors. There were ducts underneath. We put another 2 inches of foam on, but also stopped any more air leakages because of things like ethylene and also spearmint oil treatments for stopping sprouts, and in the future DMN. We need to be a bit more airtight. We got going quite well in the beginning of September lifting, and our first crop of potatoes did 10 tonnes an acre. It is a second early and a specialist variety. The weather we've had this year has made that quite difficult, blown around with lots of serious wind, some drought, even with irrigation, and then lots of water at the end of August. The issues we've seen so far on quite a lot of the crops, we've been very careful on how we field select, and I'm always aware of things like wireworm and slug. Every 20 boxes we'll do a proper QC, 100 tubers, wash that 100 tubers, inspect it for any defects, put it on Excel, take a photograph of it, of that box, and also do a hot box of 25 tubers, and then we'll do a whole QC and peel so we can see what a hot box is and also what natural bruising might show. But slugs showing up, and the other one is wireworm. And the main reason I've seen that is that we had a very dry period in May and planting was getting quite dry, and we thought we haven't seen it, we'd test baited, but we kept applying somewhere we've irrigated in some high risk areas. But the late rain we had in August brought the moisture up, they came up to the top, canopy was mainly flailed by then, or a lot of it was in the beginning of September, and they found potatoes. And they're not going to move away from potatoes to go outside and find some ferric phosphate. So we will set the fridge plant to about 10 degrees, and we'll run when the store is loading during the day even. We'll have the door open, the fans on, and the fridge on. So the potatoes are respiring, they're alive, and when you lifted them, they really are chucking out a lot of CO2, and they're really a bit unhappy by it all. And if we can dry and take that moisture out and avoid any condensation with airflow going all the time, we seem to be able to then help with the curing, reduce a bit of the opportunity of the skin diseases to manifest themselves. And as soon as we've got one store done, we'll close it up, and especially if it's warm potatoes going in, we'll then start cooling down straight away. We always now, on every store, have it fans running. The cost of electricity is scary, but I want dry potatoes and I want them to cure dry. So if we've cut a few here and there accidentally, I want that wound to heal. And the best way of that is airflow and just taking the humidity out, because those potatoes are putting a lot of moisture out and CO2. And if we've got some really wet, damp, claggy soil on there, we'll even put a Weatherspoon tent together in a lean-to even there, and just turn the fans on, and just try and suck as much air and airflow through as possible to dry it and crack it. We've got a couple here that are forced ventilation with tunnels underneath, and it'll blow it through, but we've got some that will chuck it over the top. But we've gone and put dividing the walls, and the aim is that then there we are actually forcing the air through the box ends or the pallet tine ends and through the boxes to try and improve the drying. Do those, and I think that's 75 to 80% of the improvement in airflow and drying on there. But it's just fans, and we've got a couple of stores that are not great with on the roof space, and we'll actually get some little fans that are 13 amp, and we just have those, and we nearly on some of them run them forever, and we use that in any bits of little spots where it could be a little bit damper or a bit of dead air. We'll put those in and monitor them and do that, because just keeping condensation out and keeping air movement, especially when you're drying a crop, is really important. It just helps wound healing, and also silver scurf, skin spot as well, and black dot. And the other thing we're quite aware of now is CO2. We have got monitors in the stores with 30 megahertz we've got, which does humidity, temperature and CO2, and that's on a live stream that I can look on the website on my phone. And also I can actually look in real time what the CO2 levels are like, and what I do when changing the air over can make a marked difference quite quickly. So there's a couple of stores here we've sealed very well. We've actually had to lift the front doors up very slightly just to have a little bit of an air exchange. So we're aiming at about under 4,000 parts per million. On all of the stores we have about one temperature probe every 50 tonnes. And I've got that, and we record that every 2 days. With an overflow, chucking it over and then having the curtains, you've got a lot of airflow coming back through, and you've got to just temper that, because you can centre it round where the fridge is and it's sucking it back in. You can get a lot more air movement there, and on the sides can be slower. We've done some developments this year following AHDB's storage work. We've switched one fridge in a 1,300 tonne store and turned it so it's facing the wall. We've improved the curtains as well. We've actually put a nice wooden stairs in for safe access. We've actually moved to 8 high as well. We're just doing the work now on checking the anemometers, but the temperature probes are showing very, very even all the way through the stack, from the top through the middle and at the bottom and in the front face. So we've been mildly surprised, not from the work of what the AHDB have done, but actually seeing it in practice as well. It does give me a lot of confidence about what the AHDB storage unit are doing. You've got some expertise there who will give you the right information. As a potato grower and a levy payer, we've got to take it, we've got to use it. If we don't use it and they're doing all this work, well, we're standing still. We've got to get better. The other thing I monitor quite carefully is the electricity costs as well. We did a thing with AHDB about looking at a leaky store and a good insulated store, and seeing how inefficient the leaky store was. 8 years ago, black hearts show up in one variety because we'd sealed the stores too well. Threw away 300 tonnes of perfect potatoes. And in one other store we saw a little bit of CO2 because we'd sealed it up well, and we saw some black heart in there, and my wife had to QC every box and cut 50 tubers, and if she found a hint in one of those 50 tubers, she'd then do another 50, and if there was only another hint, then that was okay. So we're doing positive release for that, and that was 800 boxes. But from a store point of view, I'll look at between 2 and 3 days a week. I will be going and checking the store, especially on pull down. And it's so vital because you can be so busy doing other things. You've got to give yourself just 15-20 minutes, or someone else to go and look to check that everything, there's not a tripped light out, or the fridge is knocked off, or fans are turned off. And also the best thing is you've got to go in the store to smell it. You must smell it, because if you can pick up a little scent of something like a little bit of blackleg or a bit of mustiness to it, you're feeling then that there's something not right. So I went in the store yesterday and we just made some curtains to improve the airflow through the boxes, but it just meant that those 2 side boxes at 2 high were a little bit less airflow, a little bit blocked, and you could just see there was a little darker when you got your head torch on. Didn't seem like the airflow was just enough to take that respiring moisture off. So I just moved those curtains a little bit just to get a bit more airflow through. If you've got some issues in the box, at least know what they are, so you know what to do, and just blow, inspect, and keep sampling. With the marketplace it is at the moment, we have reduced our acreage by 15% because I can't see a margin. I don't want to take the risk. With COVID still about, we don't know when our demand will be coming up. One thing I really want to do for the potato industry, and especially for the pre-pack, is getting exciting potatoes that people actually say taste great. Oh, no, we've had a couple of emails this year already, in this autumn already. Pleased to see these potatoes are back on the shelves. Taste great, thank you very much. And we had some woman from Sheffield ringing up and saying, is that Mr. Mark Means? We'd just like to compliment, this is how potatoes used to taste. So we're very fortunate with the soil we've got. We've got a lot of minerals in there. We can get, it seems to add a bit more flavour to it as well. And I'd love to be storing at 5 or 6 degrees centigrade, using DMN, putting the potato to sleep, keeping the sugar content low, and giving the customer great satisfaction that actually this is what they do taste like. You know, that's my ideal.
Well, I think Mark's passion for the industry was really in infection and has touched on quite a few points that are key to bear in mind, and there was some important messages there from him. So Mark will be joining us later on in the Q&A, but for now, if we could have Adrian Cunnington join me, and Adrian will be talking to us about store management after loading. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. I was interested to hear Mark say, get in there and smell those stores, and I thought that was a really good bit of advice, because that you can tell an awful lot from doing just that. But I'm going to touch this afternoon on one or two points which Mark's already mentioned in his video, but I'm just going to get into a little bit more detail about the use of air, when we need to be cooling, and I will also go on and talk a little bit about the spout suppression situation, which I have covered previously, but which I think probably bears repeating. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so first and foremost, drying. Air is absolutely crucial to manage the crop immediately after loading, and not least in some of the conditions that we've got right now. We need to be focusing on moisture removal, because wet potatoes won't store. Moisture removal means removing the surface moisture. We don't want to dehydrate the crop, but in most situations that's not too much of a risk. It's more a case of getting uniformity across the store and getting all of the moisture out of the crop. It will also reduce the risk of disease. So we need to dry with the maximum air available until all of that surface moisture has gone. And there's some simple rules that we need to understand around that. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So first and foremost, positive ventilation is best. So if we have availability of positive ventilation and we've got wet crop coming in off the field, then do use it if you can. Positive ventilation applies principally to bulk stores and any specially constructed box stores where positive ventilation systems have been incorporated. So this means we're pushing the air through the potatoes physically, forcing the air through the potatoes, and that will enable it to be most effective. If we're on passive ventilation systems where we're pushing air around the potatoes, then that's not going to be as effective, but air always takes a path of least resistance, so it's not always easy to get to uniformity in those types of stores. But if we don't have positive, then let's at least try to make it as close to positive as we can, or make it work as efficiently as possible. And Mark has touched on some of those points in his video, things like putting in tarpaulins, for example, which I'll come back to in a minute. Even distribution is the crucial point, and that's what we need. So if we could go to the next slide, we need an even flow of air through the whole of the stack. So next slide, please. Air coming up all the way through the potatoes, but in a uniform manner. We've not got a concentration in the center, and we achieve that by, next slide, please, going to a situation where we build static pressure in the duct, and then that static pressure is transferred into what's known as velocity pressure, which is basically the air moving. So if we think of this as, for example, a balloon, then if you blow up a balloon, then you create static pressure. So that's the static pressure in the duct. And then if you had some holes in the balloon, then the air would rush out, and that would create velocity pressure. And if you've got sufficient static pressure, then you can get uniformity across the whole store. And that's how we design bulk stores. And it's also the way we design box stores, by having a control point somewhere in the system. That may be the bottom of the box, it may be the top of the duct in a bulk store, but ultimately uniformity is what we're looking for. Next slide, please. So those same principles apply if we're using plenums to optimize some of these passive or non-positive box storage setups. We're trying to build a volume of air in the build that static pressure in the plenum so that it bleeds out uniformly across all of the boxes. And the more we can do that and prevent short circuits, then the better chance we have of getting as much air to each of the boxes as we can in the store. If we put too much back pressure onto a non-positive system, then the downside is that the air will take the shorter route and short circuit around it. So we have to balance that. But at the end of the day, we need to get air to each and every box in the store, and we need to keep that air flowing, especially if the crop is wet, to drive off that surface moisture. We also need to remember that evaporative drying will also cool potatoes. As we evaporate the moisture, then that process of evaporation through the latent heat drops the temperature. That's not a massive problem in most situations, but if we get later into the season and we start cooling a crop that's already perhaps at 6 or 7 degrees, then we might need to take other measures to make sure we get that crop adequately cured. Pull down is the next stage where we need to be thinking at the moment. So if we go to the next slide. Positive ventilation will normally reduce temperatures by around about 1 degree a day. Passive ventilation operates probably more at about half a degree a day in a typical box store, for instance. The rate of pull down is not too much of a concern in fresh market. I'm normally content that as long as there's been sufficient temperature from the field, then to do the curing, then we can pull down pretty quickly to prevent us getting too much risk of those blemish diseases developing. But obviously in a processing market where we're more sensitive about sugars, then we need to control that pull down rate at about 0.3 centigrade per day maximum. So for most crops, pull down should start as soon as possible, but we just need to be careful if we're still loading that store. Don't get too far ahead, because we need to keep temperatures as even as possible. One thing we don't want to do is create condensation. So if we can go to the next slide. Condensation is really the enemy in a store. What we don't want to do is to dry all of the crop and then create a condensation event, which is going to wet the crop again. We're back to square one, and we've got a lot of work to do to get that those potatoes back into the right conditions. So most potato stores usually have a high humidity. We're storing a lot of bags of water essentially, and the air is kept close to saturation in most freshly loaded potato stores. The humidities will be well over 90%, and therefore there isn't a lot of margin for us to have significant temperature change without that moisture dropping out onto the crop. So warm moist air being blown onto colder potatoes can create condensation. It's always that way round. It's the same situation as you would get if you were taking a can of beer out of the fridge. You're going to get that warm air from your kitchen hitting that cold can, and that's going to create condensation on the surface. It's exactly the same thing that's going to happen here in a potato store. The other thing to watch out for is structural condensation, where we get cold mornings. Again, the warm moist air coming up from the crop, hitting the surface of the roof, and if we're not adequately insulated, then we can get a layer of moisture dripping down onto the crop from structural condensation. How do we deal with that? Well, basically we just keep the air moving to drive that moisture away and not allow it to condense, and we don't allow big temperature differences to build up. So even distribution, even temperature, and less condensation risk is what we're looking for. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move now on to sprout suppression. I'm hoping that most of you who are looking for storage, certainly beyond Christmas, will have used maleic hydrazide this year. It's the baseline treatment for most of the regimes that we're using sprout suppressants in this year. And it's been important to try to ensure that we get maleic hydrazide uptake for sprout suppression, and we've been aiming at a target of 12 mg per kilo to give us some residual control in that crop. Having said that, some crops are already being reported as sprouting in store, and that's probably being exacerbated by the amount of moisture we've got. So we need to be looking at how to use some of the alternative strategies. So next slide, please. What are those slides? Well, we can use, what are those options? We can use temperature. We can drive the temperature down using fridge, and that's appropriate for the fresh market, obviously, and also for seed, where we can't necessarily even entertain any form of sprout suppression. But ethylene is the other option. That's for specific varieties and markets where we want to control sprouting, and that has to be ramped. It must be ramped. It has to be brought in steadily so that we don't have any adverse reaction from the crop in terms of respiration rates when the ethylene comes in. The other alternative, and again, this is a volatile chemical, it's easily lost from the store, rather like ethylene could be, is spearmint oil, and that's marketed as Biox-M. And all of these options have been looked at in our trials. So I'll just put up some data from those trials just to show you some of the information from those. Next slide, please. So on the left-hand side here, we've got processing, and on the right-hand side, we've got fresh. These crops have had, the blue bars have all had the actives or the treatments at the bottom, which are probably difficult to see, but from the left, untreated CIPC, ethylene, Biox-M, and DMN on the left graph, and on the right-hand graph, the same order, but with orange oil on the very far right. Essentially, the point I need you to see here is the difference between the blue and the green bars. The blue bars are the treatments on their own, and we've got quite a lot of sprouting going on here where the blue bars are, but where we've got the maleic hydrazide incorporated, then the green bars are giving us good control, and that's really what we're looking for. We've got lower sprouting in the fresh market than the processing. That's to be expected. The differences in temperature that were used explain that, but these are averages across a number of different varieties. So we're seeing the differences universally, showing the benefits of maleic hydrazide as that foundation treatment. Having said that, if you haven't got maleic hydrazide in your crop, then we can still get the best out of some of these chemicals, but we do need to pay attention to detail. And I just thought I'd touch on trying to get mint oil applied as best as we can. So next slide, please. First and foremost, all that I've been saying about drying is absolutely fundamental when we're dealing with the use of mint oil. If we've got any form of moisture in there, then that's going to allow the mint oil to collect or coalesce, so we need to avoid that. Run the fans without cooling for 24 hours prior to application, and that's to get as uniform a temperature as possible. Work with your contractor to set the store up correctly. Some have slightly different preferences on the use of fans, but basically the message is to reduce the speed of fans using the same type of equipment that you may have been using for CIPC. Use those reduced speed fans to recirculate the mint oil. And what we've got to do is strike a balance between moving enough air and fog around the store to make sure that we get uniformity and circulation to all parts of the store without risking localized concentrated deposits of chemical on the crop, which can happen in some circumstances. And if we look at the Biox-M label, next slide please, it suggests that air circulation of between 20 and 50 CFM is likely to deliver good circulation. Excessive fan speed may increase the risk of product coalescence, but inadequate fan speed is unlikely to deliver an even distribution. So that illustrates the need for that balance. And if we go to the next slide, then we can see here that this coalescence that may occur if we get the fans going too quickly. You get this type of splattering of near a fan. We don't want any of this sort of thing going on at all. So we need to make sure that our air speeds are limited to 5 to 10 meters per second. That's a speed going through the fan, or 1,000 to 2,000 feet per minute. Our research shows that these speeds generally work well in potato stores, and we need to avoid this type of unwanted effect that you can see here on what has been some crop treated this season already. Next slide, please. Finally, I'm just going to touch on health and safety. It is just a reminder, but it is an important reminder. Please check the safety of all the structures and systems in your stores. Remember that carbon dioxide can build up to dangerous levels in stores as well, so we need to be careful not to allow that to happen to high levels. We need to be managing to around about 5,000 ppm if you've got that capability to measure before you're entering the store for any length of time. And we do not want to take risks. And I've got a message here from Tim Papworth about working at height. Next slide, please.
Hi, my name's Tim Papworth, and I know from personal experience, as I fell in a potato store while changing a light bulb 14 feet under concrete. And if it wasn't for the quick thinking of my staff, the air ambulance and Addenbrooke's Hospital, I wouldn't be here today. The knock-on effect on my family and staff was immense, and I'm determined that this will not happen again to any of them. Remember, it's your life, your health and safety. Don't risk it.
And I think a very pertinent message from Tim. He's obviously had that experience, and he's not alone. Sadly, there are other people who've had those types of experience. When you've been in the industry a long time, you tend to remember those sorts of things. So do take care in your store, and also take measures to protect lone workers, including you, because in some of those instances, people have been on their own in stores and haven't had the capability to contact people as quickly as they might. There's information on the hse.gov.uk website. And then just to finish, I just want to mention that we can help you. The AHDB is still running its storage network scheme with free one-to-one visits to stores, discussion of options for your business, and you can book on the number shown on the screen here, and that will be available later. We can go through all those points that I've mentioned today, and as a finishing point, I'd just like to tell you that the new approach to storage is going to need to be integrated. It will need to be a multifaceted approach to managing storage. And I've written an article in the new AHDB Agronomy Focus publication highlighting some of those points, which I would encourage you to read, and do come back to us if you've got any questions on anything you've seen there or heard today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for this really comprehensive overview of what to bear in mind at this time of year. Now, we've had a couple of questions come in. So one is around lifting a dry potato. So if you've lifted with minimum damage and the potatoes are dry, what's the maximum daily temperature reduction you would go to? Would you drop the temperature by 1 degree centigrade a day? Would that be okay? I know you've touched on that briefly in your presentation.
I would say yes. Yeah, that's fine. 1 degree a day is. I'm assuming that this is a crop that is able to go to fresh market rather than processing. I would be a little bit more cautious if it was a processing crop. I wouldn't be taking that down too quickly. More of a point. I think I put 0.3 in the presentation, but 0.3, 0.5, that sort of rate, rather than being rapid with the drop of temperature of the processing crop. But for fresh market, yeah, by all means, go down at that sort of rate.
Okay. And another question for you, Adrian, with regards to running store fans. So if running store fans for 24 hours without cooling, how will this affect crops and store air temperature? And can you estimate any increases?
In terms of taking the temperature up a little bit, yes. I mean, the energy from the fans will take the air up a little bit. I wouldn't be worried about that. I mean, I think if it is going to take it up, maybe half, 3/4 of a degree maximum, but it's more important to get the uniformity of the temperature from running the fans than it is to worry about the lack of cooling for a relatively short period of time. Because if we're going to be applying a sprouts suppressant, then getting that universally across the crop to get the maximum amount of impact from that dose of sprouts suppressant is going to be the overriding aspect.
Now we've had another question come in on and pull down, because you've mentioned that. What is the justification for a maximum of 0.3 degrees pull down for the processing sector in particular?
It's really to avoid any form of shock. If we use too cool an air jet through the crop, then we can get some form of reaction from the potatoes. So tend to keep that more modestly, so it's not a big temperature difference between the crop and the air, and just try and gradually bring the temperature down rather than do it in big chunks and then find that we've lost the quality of the potatoes for their end use in the process.
Okay, and you've talked about using mean toil and looking out for what's on the label, particularly in relation to those fan running times and the issue around sealing stores. Another question asked coming around that. So if using mean toil and a sealed store, what is the maximum CO2 level you would allow the store to reach before flushing?
Again, depends on a little bit on which market we're going for, but I think I would be tempted to say that we ought to be looking at values around the maybe 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, that sort of value. The important thing again here is that we are having to strike a balance between accumulation of CO2 and keeping the chemical in the store for it to do the job that's required. It is not an absolutely ideal situation where we have this, we can't have the best of both worlds. We need to be able to get the effectiveness out of the chemicals. We're going to be limited on the amount of chemicals that we can use, both from the point of view of the availability of the amount of active and also from the point of view of cost. So it's a question of, again, trying to strike a balance. And so I would be allowing the CO2 to go up a little bit, particularly relatively early in the storage period like it is now, and not worrying quite so much about flushing, because it is important that we get the effectiveness out of the chemicals, and we are dealing with different kettle fish than we had with CIPC, undoubtedly. So we do need to take into account all the different pros and cons of these products.
And would you go for the same approach when storing for the processing and the fresh market sectors? Or what level of CO2 would be good for each of those?
I think it's difficult to pin that down exactly. We are still doing trials on CO2 tolerances at Sutton Bridge at the moment, so being categoric about that is extremely difficult. I know a lot of the processors are trying to limit their stores to about 4,000. I think Mark said 4,000 in his video. If Mark's on the line, would you like to comment on that at all?
Yeah, we go at 4,000. We will be flushing below that, but we aim to try and keep it below 3,000. But I haven't got much science in what it is. And the thing is that, and if I'm correct, Adrian, 4,000 is actually only 0.4% of CO2. And you've been talking about, in actual fact, 3 or 4% is lethal in a store. Well, we're a tenth of that, aren't we?
You are, yes. We've been running trials up to 1% of CO2, and that's where we're starting to see effects. So, and that's a continuous 1%. Below that, we're not seeing massive effects, but there will be some side effects in terms of fry color. But I think you know, some of our trials where we've gone up to 1%, we haven't seen massively adverse effects on frying. But it depends on varieties, and it depends on the specific situations, and it's extremely complicated, and it's very difficult to test all eventualities across the multiple crops and multiple varieties and multiple regimes. So it is a difficult one, and it's going to take time for us to gather some of that information, unfortunately.
What is the HSE level of CO2 that they say is of some risk, and do some people react to CO2 levels differently to other people?
I'm sure that's the case. The working exposure limits are 5,000 ppm for a whole day working in a store, and 15,000 for 15 minutes. So those are critical levels for health. So you know, you have to assess those specifically in relation to your own assessment of risk in individual stores.
And Mark, thanks very much for joining us. You mentioned in the video clip there issues around black heart. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
You wanting yeah, well, black heart, I would always look at trying to save energy costs and keeping the stores cool, because we were trying to store some potatoes till June, July, and we then sealed them up with some builder's merchant insulation, like loft insulation around the doors, and did that. And this was 7 or 8 years ago. We then, on one variety, it highlighted the CO2 level, and it caused that variety right next to another variety which had no show at all of black heart. But this one, though, we had to write off 300 tons, and on another store, same variety, we had to do positive release and cut 50 tubers, and if we found any, we cut another 50 tubers, and we found any again, that will be put to one side and probably went to stock feed. But now we've invested in CO2 monitors. I'm not sure, but I'm being on the safe side. So for us, just over 3,000, I'll get an email or a text saying it's up to there, and I'll just tweak the flushing. We don't do a flushing. We actually do a different way with the refrigeration engineer we use, B&D refrigeration, and we actually then play with a little louver in the back of the fridge box, and a time clock, and we can then open that up so that when the fans are working, it will draw in some fresh air to mix in with other. So we're not bringing in lots of moist air with two big loops at front and back. We're just bringing a small 6-inch pipe in, and they've done a great job, and we're learning with it. But a potato is a really lively thing when you put that in, when you put them in into store. But one question I want to ask Adrian is, does DMN suppress CO2? Because if it quietens things down and makes them more dormant, then I guess the rate of respiration and exhaustion of CO2 should be lower.
That sounds plausible, but to the best of my knowledge, that's as yet unproven.
And another question there that's come in with regards to black hard and CO2 are the two linked, or is it linked to varieties? Adrian, do you have any comments on that?
We did some work at Sutton Bridge probably 5-6 years ago, around the time that Mark was talking about, where we looked at multiplicity of factors affecting black heart risk, and undoubtedly there are impacts from a lot of different aspects. So variety, respiration rates, CO2, storage temperatures, all having effects on the likelihood of black heart. So it's not, again, it's not a simple answer. It's not solely CO2. We have established that, but we certainly were able to develop a test to heighten our awareness, shall we say, and to alert us to crops which we thought were a higher risk. Soil type was another factor because of the likelihood of anaerobic conditions in the soil. So those sorts of things were all impacting the risk of black heart. So there is a report on the AHDB website, but I'll probably see if I can find where that is and get that put straight up onto the storage hub if it's available for people to have a look at. We saw black heart on cold temperature, a well-sealed store, and CO2, and a sprout suppressant. But I have seen, I think CO2, but with cold temperature. I mean, you know, you're going down to 1.5, 2 degrees. The potato's trying to stay alive and actually keep warm, so its respiration rate will actually go up higher from there. But we have also seen quite a long time ago black heart from King Edward's, which got flooded. We had a very high thunderstorm, anaerobic conditions, and didn't manifest itself at the beginning, but when we got into store, it then showed up. So I guess there was some cell damage happened in the field, and sometimes it will show up later. That's my inexperienced experience.
And Mark, have you seen any other links at all? I mean, Adrian was mentioning all these other factors. In your experience, what have you seen that the links are there between black heart and other factors?
I think, as Adrian said, variety, and certain do seem to do it. I think now with some of these newer sprout suppressants, we're a lot cuter and clever on how to introduce them into store. And I don't know if that's just a change of the respiration rate of the potato, or the increase rapidly of the CO2 level. Those I don't know. I think there's some more work to be needed to be done on there. You know, honestly, I would say we want to be storing at warmer temperatures to get the skin finish and actually have a nice tasty potato. But skin finish is key, or the eye of the holder is key at the moment. But you know, I'd rather be storing it warmer, lower energy cost, lower production of CO2. A nice tasting, less sugary potato. Well, that's wrong, less sugary. But a nice tasting potato, and maybe finding varieties that will keep a skin finish at a higher temperature.
And moving on from black heart, obviously other things to bear in mind and measure in the store is moisture. Now, Adrian, and then I guess we can come on to you, Mark. Would you recommend a technique for moisture measurements in the potato box or stacks? What would you recommend?
Getting in there and finding out for yourself using just general store inspection rather than any other techniques, really. I mean, years ago we did try to measure surface moisture on potatoes, particularly in relation to condensation risk, actually, but it wasn't successful. It wasn't reliable. So I think at the moment we're really focusing on good store management. And coming back to that point that I made at the start of my my talk that Mark had said was get in and smell. If the store smells fresh, then that's telling you a lot, really, that you're doing the right thing. Whereas if it smells musty, then there's a fairly good chance that something is wet somewhere, and that's causing that.
And Mark, what do you use to measure moisture? How do you go about it?
The best thing is it's got to be a visual inspection, and it's a good head torch, and maybe a torch, but it's looking around sometimes the nooks and crannies. Is there any shading? Is there a bit of damp and dry potatoes? The other thing is that you've got to do is actually dig into the box a bit more to know what's happening, because at certain points, if you haven't got enough airflow, the potatoes underneath it can still be quite warm, and the ones on top have been chilled because there's a bit of cold air wafting around them, but not enough. And the top layer might be dry, but then you've got to pick off those potatoes there, and then you'll actually see condensation underneath that top layer because you chilled the top one. So it is blow, blow, blow. And if you've got any poorer corners, we look at stacking in the future, but you can get some great portable fans that are just single phase, and redirect the air around it to prevent that. And we use quite a lot. We've got some old stores that store well till May, June, July, but they're not perfect, and so we've got a system in now of fans to just help blow that air around.
And moving on to store checks, we've had a question come in around that, and when is the best time to do them? So can store checks be done once filled, or do they need to be empty?
I'm guessing this question is about checking equipment, is it? I don't really know. I mean, the process would normally be to check all of the equipment ahead of storage, and then once it's in use, then you need to be able to take advantage of that equipment. So I would get probes put into potato. Information is key. So if you need to know the temperature of potatoes, get probes put into boxes, and supplement that with a handheld temperature probe that you can take around the store and assess elsewhere to evaluate whether you've got temperature gradients building up and you've got hot spots. Those are the sorts of things that you need to be able to spot and deal with as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're creating a situation where you're going to get localized condensation, localized sprouting, and difficulties in maintaining quality.
And Mark, can I bring into this? What's your approach there with store checks? And you've mentioned how you go about
Okay, so
checking your stores once they're filled.
Okay, so store check 2 or 3 times a week when you've got them, starting to get them settled. But pulling down, you're putting a huge amount of stress and strain on the refrigeration plant and the fans, and that's when you're putting them into store. They can be quite warm outside. You're putting quite a lot of load on the refrigeration plant, and this year we've had a couple of condenser fans have gone, and one inverter's gone that we've had for about 10 years, and you just got to keep noticing that. And if you have the inverter fan gone on your main fans, it's not like you just lost the cold air bit. You actually got no ventilation at all in the store. But the other thing is just probably having somehow the spec of the fans you've got, or you can, is a bit higher in the CFM you need, because then you can use the inverters to slow things down when you've got the potatoes dried and cured and stored at the desired temperature you want to hold at, and save some money, but also just less airflow over that. Maybe a little bit less weight loss, but there's more work in that to be seen as well. But temperature probes, calibrate against a properly calibrated handheld, but also the other way is, I don't know, a bucket of water. It doesn't matter what the temperature is, but as long as they're all reading the same and you use a handheld that's been checked and you've got the same, great. 3 of our stores, we can put all 8 probes in the stores in one bucket, which is a nice way of just giving a bit of confidence that everything's reading high. I've got one probe reads 0.4 high, but I know that, so when I do the checking, I just deduct 0.4. It's all of those bits, just knowing that you can start to learn what a store's like, and when it starts to warm up, you know that what's going on here, there might be a bit of sprouting, and those are all bits of history, and the only way of that is watching the numbers and looking.
Yeah, no, that's you've got some really good points there, Mark. It's about knowing what's going on in your store and keeping on top with those checks, isn't it?
It's very nice to have electronic and computer everything, and everything's telling you everything's hunky-dory, but it might be just that I'm a dinosaur with technology, but it's still a living thing, and you've still got unreliable British, German and Chinese technology that will go wrong.
Well, on that note, we better move on. We've had a couple of other questions with regards to sprout control, and I guess that's one's for you, Adrian. What's the most cost-effective solution regarding sprout control, particularly when MH has been applied and when storing till May and June?
What's the most cost-effective? Well, at the moment, it's a question of using the MH to give you that baseline residual that I was talking about, and then using a product. So again, I would make a split between the different markets. If you're going into fresh market, then ethylene is a strong contender if you've got the appropriate varieties, and you can use that. If you're looking at processing, then ethylene is probably more difficult. Certainly, if you're not sure of the varieties suitability for use with ethylene. We're running trials at the moment to assess ethylene sensitivities, but spearmint oil would be my route then, and to use mint oil as effectively as possible. So that means getting the best out of each dose in the way I was talking about. but we are in uncharted waters to a large extent this season, and so it is difficult to be categoric. If you haven't done all the homework on sealing up stores and making sure that we haven't got leakage, then some of those strategies could easily fall down to some extent, at least, as a result of chemical loss. So if we lose chemical, we've got to add it back in again, and that's extra cost. So it's not straightforward, but attention to detail is probably the underlining point in trying to get the best out of the options we've got at the moment. And
if we could bring in Mark on this, what's with the CIPC no longer an option now? Mark, what you've mentioned malic hydrazide in the video, and can you tell us a bit more about your approach there to sprout control this season?
Temperature will be one. We'll be storing similar, sort of between, slowly getting down to about 2.5, 2.7. At the moment, we're just above 3, and we'll be just gently lowering it down on the pre-packed side. We have got a few that are for the processing side, and we'll be storing a little bit lower with the varieties we've got. But we will be expecting 1 or even probably 2 spearmint oil applications, and then 1 contract for pre-packing. We're trying to store till July. It could be 3, and those are very expensive costs, but I hope we don't need to do it. But it's just airtight. But you've got that quandary, CO2 airtightness, to not allow the volatile, the volatile spearmint oil to disappear. So we've invested with the insulation and making it a bit more airtight. But we're very much learning it. We are in the dark at the moment, but good job we've got Adrian around to give us some very practical and up-to-date information of which way to head.
And touching on that, actually, Mark, we've had another question come in. Someone interested in the work going on at Stonebridge, and in particular the storage visits. Adrian, anyone interested in getting a one-to-one visit from Stonebridge and the storage network, what can they expect?
The general format of the visits is for us to come onto site. We've obviously got some limitations as to what we can do due to COVID at the moment, but essentially we can come onto site, take a walk around stores, and basically make an assessment of individual stores. Now, we've been doing that on empty stores for the majority of the summer, where we've been able to operate. But now that stores are loaded, then there's still opportunity to look at individual situations, individual setups. It's not so easy necessarily to alter things, but we can still give advice on, and it informs our advice if the stores are operating, to see temperatures, etc. So we can get just as valid an assessment of a store, and hopefully give some pointers as to how to improve that store if it needs improving, and to signpost people to relevant information which may assist them in their store management going forward. And clearly, sprout suppression is one of those areas. The whole sprout suppression landscape is changing by the day still. There are products that are being looked at from the point of view of trying to get authorizations, as AHDB has submitted an emergency authorization for DMN, and that is an ongoing situation. But that is for long-term processing. It's not for fresh market at this stage. But I also understand from Dawn Fresh that they are now in a situation where their main application for approval will hopefully be proceeding very shortly. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel, shall we say, for introducing further options. And it's not just DMN. There's also the likelihood that we will get orange oil and eventually 3-decan 2-own to supplement the current ethylene and spearmint oil options. So in 2 or 3 years' time, we could have several choices to make in terms of sprout suppression options.
Okay, well, I think we'll before we move on to the next part of the webinar, if I could perhaps have from you, Adrian and Mark, just your key messages with regards to managing your store after loading. Adrian, what would be your key message there for consideration for growers out there?
My key message would be dry, dry, dry. Make sure your crop is dry. If you get dry potatoes into store, or if you can't get dry ones into store, if you can dry them once they're in the store, then you stand an awful lot better chance of being able to achieve what you want to achieve. And so that would be my sole priority at this stage. If you're already in a situation where you've got dry crop, then that's great, but there'll be a lot of people who aren't yet, and they will need to focus very strongly on that point to make sure that they increase their chances of getting a good crop out of the store at the end of the day.
And Mark, what you mentioned smelling and inspecting your store. What would be your key messages for managing?
I just say it's blow every opportunity. So if you got now, we've just had 15 mil of rain today. Into a new store to start filling is just turn the fans on and blasting. So the first ones that go in, I've actually got a lot of time to catch up and dry out, and just keep on doing it, and then invest in a couple of portable fans we need to. But it's just blow, yeah. And you know, it's not been pleasant at the moment, harvest this year. We're trying to be kind to potatoes, and if you get them dry, you are such a long way to be able to store them for longer. And so really echoing what Adrian said, but he's the expert, so I just follow him. Blow and dry.
Okie doke. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. I know you've got to head off, so thanks very much, Mark, and thanks everybody for feeding in your questions. And just a reminder that we do have basis and roaster points available. So if you haven't submitted your details yet, please do so, and we'll be able to process that. So if I could ask my colleague David to join me here to introduce the next part of the webinar, and we'll be able to provide you with a harvest update. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Laura. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm David Wilson, the Knowledge Exchange Manager for East Anglia in the southeast. But to break out the area, we're actually going to go up to the north of Scotland. And earlier this week, I had a quick chat with Andy Stephen, an agronomist up there, about how the season's going, with his insight to the local area, seed crops, and also around the country. So I will turn my camera off as you don't want to see two of me just now. And if Christian can play the video.
I'm Andy Stephen. I'm an agronomist up in northeast Scotland, so covering growers from the Black Isle through Murrayshire into Aberdeenshire and down into Angus. We've had a mixed season, so it's like a game of two halves almost. September was fantastic conditions. Everybody made great progress. A lot of lifting done, especially seed growers. So quite a few were finished just by the end of September. And then really since then, since Storm Alex came at the start of October, it's flipped, and we've now had 100 mils plus rainfall in October, and what's left has been slow to get out of the ground. So a lot of broken days, you know, rain overhead stopping things, and conditions in the field as well getting a bit damp and soggy underfoot.
So I remember when we spoke earlier in the month, and you were saying that obviously there was a big deluge of rain came 2-3 weeks ago, and it was sort of split between north and southeast, as it were, and some bits got it and could take it, and others not so much. But is everything just getting fairly wet all around now?
Since then, that storm was really bad down the east coast, so sort of Fraserburgh right down to Fife. A lot of growers got 100 mils, but even west into Murrayshire and the Black Isle, we got 50 mils. But since then, we've had another 50 plus. So conditions everywhere are getting sticky. But like I say, most of the seed growers would be done, and probably around 20% were left, but it's very mixed. You know, some growers will be finished. Some guys have got a bit to do yet.
Yeah, is that fluctuation in size of grower, the fact that 200 growers grow half the area and tonnage, that those that have a bit left, it's quite a lot.
Yeah,
and others are getting through
it is. But I would think, you know, they're certainly ahead of last year, which was much wetter. And what's been harvested, certainly in September, was in great condition. You know, clean crops into store, good quality, no issues really, and decent crops in general, probably slightly above average yields. Maybe tuber numbers back a little. Just I think with that early dry spell before tuberization, just took the edge off tuber numbers that made it through the summer.
Because if we go right back to planting, how was the season with you and your customers up there?
It was a fantastic start, much like the rest of the country. You know, we had a really dry April and May. Conditions were just perfect for getting in crops in good order. Probably one of the earliest plantings up here we've seen, and a lot of crops emerging late May, early June, and off to a flying start. Grew quickly in early June, and then just got rain at the right time to make sure we didn't get any big problems with common scab, and probably gave us enough in terms of tuber numbers that we weren't seriously hobbled. But did take, you know, certainly tuber numbers are back in general, I would say, across all varieties. So it's a slightly bolder crop, but in great neck, you know, very few problems. There are little bits powdery scab, little bits of common scab around, but nothing major. And from what I've heard from guys who've started grading for the seed markets for export, say Egypt, they're getting on pretty well. It's grading fairly straightforward. Not many issues that are concerning them at this point.
That's positive, because also on this webinar we're talking quite a bit about storage as well, and as you said, with the earlier harvest, stuff would have been going to store with reasonably high tuber temperatures. How are things holding up in store, and etc.?
Was concerns early, you know, about damage and bruising, because it was certainly by the end of September it was a challenge to get soil through harvesters. So that might be one thing that comes back in the winter when crops get across graders, when they see if there has been any damage done, especially on high dry matter varieties.
Yeah, and then because are people switching fridges on in stores already, getting temperatures pulled down?
Yeah, where they've finished early and you know, curing's been done, then I know some growers are looking to get fridges on pretty sharp. There's a long winter to go, and like you were saying, crops did come in probably slightly warmer than normal, but there's a lot of good storage out there now with high volume ventilation systems, so we should cope with that, I would think.
And then ambient temperatures up with you overnight, have you had many close to ground frosts?
Yeah, we had a couple of really cold nights again just at the turn of the month. So we were down to -2 on the Blackout one night, and yeah, hovering around 0 along the coast here. So yeah, we've had a little bit of cold weather, but nothing serious. Although it's been predominantly north and east winds for the last couple of weeks, so that'll certainly take the edge off the temperature. You know, we're not much around 10, 12, 13 degrees during the day. The best it got last week was 14 or 15.
Yeah. So yeah, nothing's hurting in the ground, but time is of the essence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, it's with that amount of rainfall that we've had now. If fields are lying wet, then they're going to certainly do nothing to improve the quality of what's left in there.
And have you been hearing much from colleagues around the country about other areas and harvest, etc.? Obviously, we produce our lifting progress, which is actually going to be a new one released on Friday of this week, which doesn't include the seed areas, so the numbers may look slightly skewed. But yeah, just wonder if you'd heard any more.
Yeah, I think it's been very local, you know, depending on the weather and the storms that have come through. So I'd heard that southeast England was probably behind where they would normally expect to be because they've had a lot more rainfall. But certainly places like Yorkshire and Lincolnshire are nothing like as bad as it was last year. So they're progressing reasonably well.
And then the harvest with you is, we've spoken in the past about the push more towards self-propelled harvesters now. Is it a case of covering the ground quicker, or that coupled with just good lifting conditions has allowed everyone to get stuff in good order?
Yeah, definitely a bit of both. I mean, there's been a shift towards self-propelled harvesters over the last 4 or 5 years. So there's a lot of them around, and some growers using windrowers as well. So
fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for the good insight there. So yeah, that was a quick insight there into how the harvest is going. Obviously, I do appreciate that that's a snapshot into one particular area, and the rain we've been having recently is quite regional and different pockets. But at AHDB, we do try and provide a bit of a dialogue about what's happening around the country. So if we have the next slide, please, Christian. We produce a lifting report. It's carried out in conjunction with ADAS. You can find it on our website at ahdb.org.uk/potato/lifting-progress. Or say if you just type lifting progress into your search engine, it'll take you straight there. This was last published on the 29th of September. So you'll see that the figures might look slightly skewed at the moment, but the good news is it's being refreshed this Friday. So with Potato Weekly that comes out from ourselves, you will see a link to this. In the handout section of today's webinar, there is the full detailed report from the end of September. But please do keep your eyes peeled for this Friday's version. If you don't currently receive Potato Weekly, if you do, please get in touch, and we'll try and get you signed up and ensure you do get that. But it's also worth mentioning this, it does say in the small print there that this doesn't include seed areas, hence why the Scottish area at the top there looks slightly, not the top, sorry, at the bottom in fact, looks slightly worse than it is, because obviously the seed area covers a large part of that and that's been harvested. So please go onto our website and have a look, one of the many services we offer. So I will now hand back to Laura, who I think's got one more piece to go.
Thanks very much, David. The sun is just has just come out of the grey, but hopefully you can still see me.
The sun shines on the grey.
Yeah. Thanks, David, for the update. That was really useful. And yes, just a final word, Adrian, on sprout suppression and CIPC tMRL specifically. If you could give us a quick overview on that and what's the latest.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Yeah, I just wanted to have a quick word about the outcome from the SCOPAF committee. This is a Brussels committee that's been reviewing the residue level for chlorprofam CIPC, and it has only just but has announced that the temporary MRL will be 0.4 ppm, which was widely suspected, but hasn't been confirmed until very recently. It needs to be published in a European journal to be official, but we have it on good authority that that's where it will be. There is no firm information yet on the exact date this will take effect. We are expecting it to be in spring or summer 2021, but at this stage we don't have the date. But that will follow in due course. But the tMRL will be 0.4 ppm or 0.4 mg per kilo of chlorprophan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adrian, for the update. And I guess we have had questions come in with regards to just spot suppression in general, and specifically DMN and the likelihood of having that in the toolbox for the following year. But you've mentioned that AHDB has submitted for emergency application. What's the likelihood for DMN to be available for growers in the future?
I hope it's going to be good news, but I have no way of being able to give anybody an assurance on that. It has to go through the approval process like every other agrochemical, and so it will be one element of the toolbox, as I mentioned earlier. So if it's successful, and based on the fact that it is in use in other European countries, then we would expect that to be the case. But we just got to wait to go through the processes.
Okay, well, in that case, I think we'll draw the webinar to a close, and we will be in touch with people directly if your questions haven't been answered specifically. And again, if you fit in your basis points and your basis number and your ROSO number, we'll be able to process that for you. So either in the questions box or in the chat box as well. So please do feed those through. Now, I just wanted to touch very quickly on resources and support available. If I just have the next slide come up, Christian, please. And yeah, just click through so that I've got everything on there. Thank you. So David obviously mentioned one of the resources that we have available with the lifting progress, but in terms of storage, the potato storage hub is the go-to place where you can find out about the latest research that Adrian has mentioned in his talk. But any updates with the tMRL for CIPC and things like that will be made available on the potato storage hub. And now you can also stay up to date with the storage bulletin. And actually, we wanted to take stock of who is signed up and who isn't and would like to. So if I could just have the polls up so that people can answer the question. So yes, if you would like to be added to the storage bulletin, just let us know and we'll be in touch directly with you, so that you can get in your mail. It's a monthly newsletter, and it's the best way to find out about the latest research going on at Sutton Bridge and all the work going on around sprout control, but also what we touched on today. So I'll just leave the poll open for a few seconds, and then we'll be able to close it.
We've had about 50% people vote. Do you want me to close it now, Laura?
Yeah, I think that's all right. We'll maybe wait a few more seconds till we have some more answers, and then we'll close it.
think we'll close it now. It seems to stop now. So there we go.
No problem. Thanks, Christian. So as we said, anyone that would like to receive it will be in touch with you so that you get your copy, which will be now coming out next November. There's also the storage advice line available to get in touch with Adrian, but the rest of the team at Sutton Bridge. But more importantly, we do have this really key resource, which is the storage network that Adrian also talked about. So it's very easy. You call that number and you'll be able to book your visit and be able to receive advice from one of our independent trained partners. And we had a number of storage webinars towards the end of in the summer, in June, and obviously there's the one today. So all of these webinars are available for you to watch back on the AHDB website. Next slide, please. So before you go, well, I'd like to thank the speakers we've had on today, and thank you all very much for attending. We will be looking for feedback. So any feedback that you can give us via this survey that you should be receiving in your inbox after this webinar is really useful for us to improve. You know, we're on a constant journey of learning with this digital delivery and these webinars. So any feedback that we can have is always really useful. As I said, the webinar was recorded, so you'll be able to watch that back. And if you do have any questions, or if you'd like to receive the storage bulletin, please do get in touch with me, and I'll do my best to point you to the right person. Now, we do have some more webinars available coming up. So we'll have a focus on Brexit at the beginning of November. We'll be talking blackleg on the 9th and soil health on the 19th, and we have a full-on agronomy week at the end of November and beginning of December. So we've got plenty more in store for you, and you can sign up and register to these events on the link to the events page that I've put on there. Well, I think it's been a really good webinar. We've had a perspective from Mark, a perspective as a grower, and the challenges that he's had this season with regards to storing, managing his stores, particularly after loading. We've heard from Adrian and the technicalities behind drying your crop, cooling down to the right temperature, making sure that condensation is under control, and that you've got the fans running at the right speed. But if you do need any more information on that, we're here to support you through these changes. So without further ado, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you very soon in another webinar, hopefully. Thank you.